Diane stood in her cozy kitchen, humming a soft tune as she placed a lasagna into the oven. The aroma of tomatoes, cheese, and herbs filled the room, mingling with the scent of freshly baked bread. She glanced at the clock on the wall, a smile spreading across her face. Tonight was her 57th birthday, and her son Michael and his family were coming over for dinner. It had been so long since they all sat together, and she was eager to see her grandchildren again. As she set the table with her best china and polished silverware, her mind wandered to memories of past birthdays. Michael, as a little boy, his eyes wide with excitement, blowing out candles on her homemade cakes. The thought brought a warmth to her heart, a stark contrast to the chilly autumn air outside. At exactly 6 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Diane wiped her hands on her apron and rushed to the door, her heart fluttering with anticipation. She opened it to find Michael standing there, alone. His expression was hard, his eyes avoiding hers. Behind him, Victoria stood with a smug look on her face, her arms crossed. "Where are the kids?" Diane asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Victoria rolled her eyes. "We decided it was best they stay at home tonight. They don't need to be exposed to more of your toxic influence." Diane's heart sank. Toxic influence. "What are you talking about, Victoria?" Michael stepped forward, his face tight with anger. "Mom, we need to talk." They entered the house, and Diane led them to the living room, her mind racing with confusion and hurt. She motioned for them to sit, but Victoria remained standing, looking around the room with disdain. "Michael, what's going on?" Diane asked, her voice trembling. Michael took a deep breath, his eyes cold. "Mum, Victoria and I have been talking. We think it's best if you move out of the house. It's time for you to find your own place." Diane felt as though the ground had shifted beneath her feet. "Move out." "Michael, this is my home. I've lived here my entire life. Why are you doing this?" Victoria stepped in, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Oh, come on, Diane. Don't pretend you don't know. You've always been a manipulative, overbearing mother. Michael and I need space. We need to live our lives without you constantly interfering." Diane looked at Michael, tears welling up in her eyes. "Is that how you feel, Michael? After everything I've done for you?" Michael's gaze was steely. "Yes, Mom. It's how I feel. I've made up my mind. You need to leave." The words struck Diane like a physical blow. She stumbled back, her hand gripping the edge of the table for support. "I can't believe this. I've always been there for you, supported you, loved you, and now you're throwing me out like I'm nothing." Victoria's lips curled into a sneer. "Exactly. It's time for you to go, Diane." Without another word, Michael took Diane by the arm and led her to the door. He opened it and pushed her out into the cold night. Diane stood there, her breath visible in the frosty air, as the door slammed shut behind her. She felt numb, the tears streaming down her face as she walked aimlessly down the street. The night was quiet, the only sound the crunch of leaves under her feet. Diane's mind was a whirlwind of emotions, betrayal, hurt, confusion. She found herself on a park bench, collapsing onto it as sobs racked her body. How had her life come to this? How had she lost everything in the span of a few moments? The night was bitterly cold, the wind slicing through Diane's thin coat as she sat on a bench, her body shaking with sobs. The street was deserted, the only sound the rustling of dry leaves swirling around her feet. Her tears blurred the glow of the streetlights, turning them into smudged halos of light. She couldn't believe how quickly her life had shattered. "Diane?" a familiar voice called out, cutting through her despair. She looked up to see Maggie hurrying toward her, worry etched into her face. What on earth are you doing out here? Diane tried to compose herself, wiping her eyes with trembling hands. Maggie. He threw me out. Michael threw me out of my own house. Maggie's eyes widened in shock and anger. He did what? On your birthday? That's outrageous. Come on, let's get you out of the cold. She wrapped an arm around Diane's shoulders, guiding her to her car parked nearby. Inside the warmth of Maggie's car, Diane felt a tiny bit of relief, but the pain was still raw. I don't understand, Maggie. He said I was toxic, that I was interfering with his life, and Victoria, she just stood there smirking. Maggie clenched the steering wheel tightly. That woman has been nothing but trouble since the day she came into his life. Michael was never like this before he met her. Diane nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. I know. It's like she's turned him into someone I don't even recognize. Maggie drove them to her cozy townhouse, the familiar surroundings offering Diane a small measure of comfort. As they entered, Maggie turned to her with a determined look. You are staying here with me. We'll figure this out together. Once inside, Diane sat on the couch, feeling the warmth of the fireplace slowly thaw her frozen limbs. Maggie handed her a cup of hot tea and sat beside her, waiting patiently. I just don't understand how it all went so wrong, Diane said, staring into the steaming cup. I did everything for him, sacrificed so much, and now he treats me like I'm nothing. Maggie placed a comforting hand on Diane's arm. It's not your fault. Michael has been manipulated by Victoria. She's poisoned his mind against you. But we're not going to let her get away with this. Diane looked at her friend, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. What can we do, Maggie? He's made up his mind. Maggie leaned forward, her eyes shining with determination. We fight back. I know someone who can help us. My brother, Charlie. He's a private investigator. If there's any dirt on Victoria, he will find it. Diane's heart raced at the thought. You think he can help? Maggie nodded firmly. I know he can. Charlie is the best at what he does. If Victoria has skeletons in her closet, he'll uncover them. The next morning, after a restless night, Maggie called her brother. Diane watched nervously as Maggie explained the situation. After a few minutes, she hung up and turned to Diane with a reassuring smile. Charlie will meet us this afternoon. He's already on his way. The hours dragged by, each minute filled with a mix of hope and anxiety. Finally, a knock at the door signaled Charlie's arrival. He was a tall, rugged man with a serious demeanor, but his eyes softened when he saw Diane's distress. Maggie filled me in, Charlie said, sitting down opposite Diane. I'm really sorry for what you're going through, but we're going to get to the bottom of this. Diane nodded, taking a deep breath. Thank you, Charlie. I just want my son back. I want him to see what kind of person Victoria really is. Charlie gave her a reassuring nod. I'll start investigating right away. We'll find out if she's hiding anything that can help us. Over the next few days, Charlie dove into his work, leaving no stone unturned. Meanwhile, Maggie stayed by Diane's side, offering support and encouragement. The morning sun filtered through the curtains of Maggie's living room, casting a soft glow on the cozy space. Diane sat on the edge of the couch, clutching a cup of coffee, her thoughts swirling with a mixture of hope and apprehension. Maggie bustled about, trying to keep things light, but the tension in the air was palpable. Charlie will find something, Diane, Maggie said, placing a reassuring hand on her friend's shoulder. He's the best at what he does. Diane nodded, but the uncertainty gnawed at her. I just want Michael to see the truth. I want my son back. A knock on the door interrupted their conversation. Maggie hurried to answer it, revealing Charlie standing there with a determined look. He stepped inside, carrying a laptop and a thick folder under his arm. "Good morning, ladies," he greeted, setting his things down on the coffee table. "I've been digging into Victoria's past, and I've found some interesting information." Diane's heart raced. "What did you find?" Charlie opened the laptop and brought up several documents and photographs. "Victoria has a history that she's worked very hard to keep hidden. She's been involved in financial fraud, and there's a suspicious death of a former partner that's never been fully explained." Maggie leaned in, her eyes narrowing. "Tell us everything, Charlie." Charlie nodded and began his explanation. Victoria worked at a finance firm a few years ago. She was caught embezzling money but managed to avoid jail time by cutting a deal and paying a hefty fine. It was all kept out of the media, so it didn't ruin her reputation. Diane's eyes widened. "Michael has no idea about this, does he?" "I highly doubt it," Charlie replied. "But that's not all. Before she met Michael, Victoria was involved with a man named Mark Thompson. He died under mysterious circumstances, an overdose that many believed was no accident. Victoria was the last person to see him alive, but there wasn't enough evidence to charge her with anything. Diane felt a chill run down her spine. "This is it. This is what we need to show Michael." Maggie nodded vigorously. "We need to confront her with this information. She can't talk her way out of this." Charlie looked at Diane, his expression serious. "Are you ready for this? It's going to be a tough battle." Diane took a deep breath, feeling a newfound resolve. "I'm ready. I need to do this for Michael, for my family." They spent the rest of the morning planning their approach. Maggie made copies of the documents and photographs, while Charlie compiled everything into a comprehensive file. Diane couldn't help but feel a spark of hope amidst the fear. She had her friends by her side, and together they were going to uncover the truth. Later that afternoon, they arrived at Charlie's office, a small but well-organized space filled with filing cabinets and case files. Charlie sat behind his desk, Diane and Maggie opposite him. "Here's the plan," Charlie said, sliding the file across the desk to Diane. "We present this to Michael first. He needs to see the truth before we confront Victoria. It's important that he hears it from you." Diane nodded, clutching the file tightly. "I understand. I'll do whatever it takes." As they left the office, Diane felt a mixture of fear and determination. She knew this was just the beginning of a difficult journey, but with Maggie and Charlie's support, she felt stronger than she had in years. That evening, back at Maggie's house, Diane sat at the kitchen table, staring at the file. "I'm so afraid, Maggie. What if he doesn't believe me?" Maggie placed a hand over Diane's. "He will, Diane. The truth is powerful. He may be angry at first, but he'll come around. You have to believe that." Diane nodded, squeezing Maggie's hand. "Thank you, Maggie. I don't know what I'd do without you." "You'll never have to find out," Maggie replied with a smile. "We're in this together." Diane sat in her living room, the file of evidence resting on her lap. The house felt eerily quiet, the usual warmth replaced by a tension that made the air feel thick. She glanced at the clock on the wall. It was almost time. Her heart pounded, but a steely resolve kept her focused. This was the moment she had been preparing for. Charlie sat across from her, his eyes serious but supportive. "You're ready for this, Diane. Just stay calm and let the evidence speak for itself." Diane nodded, taking a deep breath. "I know. I have to do this for Michael." A knock on the door broke the silence. Diane stood, smoothing down her skirt, and opened the door to find Victoria standing there. a look of impatience on her face. "Why did you ask me to come here, Diane?" Victoria's voice was sharp, her eyes narrowing as she stepped inside. "Please, have a seat," Diane said, motioning to the living room. "There's something we need to discuss." Victoria crossed her arms and sat down, her gaze flickering to Charlie and then back to Diane. "What's this about?" Diane handed her the file, her hands trembling slightly. "It's about your past, Victoria. We know everything." Victoria opened the file, her expression shifting from curiosity to shock. "What is this? Where did you get this?" "Charlie is a private investigator," Diane explained. "He uncovered your history of financial fraud and the suspicious death of your former partner." Victoria's face paled, her hands shaking as she closed the file. This is ridiculous. It's all lies." Charlie leaned forward, his tone calm but firm. "It's all documented, Victoria. You can deny it all you want, but the evidence is clear. You've been hiding your true self from Michael." Victoria's eyes darted around the room, her usual confidence replaced by a flicker of panic. "You can't do this to me. Michael will never believe you." Diane stepped closer, her resolve hardening. "He will believe it, because it's the truth. And unless you want all of this to go public, you will convince Michael to reconcile with me. You owe me that much after everything you've done." Victoria stood abruptly, her face flushed with anger. "You think you can blackmail me? You have no idea who you're dealing with." Charlie remained calm, his gaze unwavering. "This isn't blackmail, Victoria. This is justice. You've manipulated and hurt too many people. It's time to face the consequences of your actions." Victoria took a step back, her expression shifting from anger to desperation. "Fine," she spat. "I'll talk to Michael, but this isn't over, Diane, not by a long shot." Diane held her ground, her eyes locked on Victoria's. "It's over when I say it's over. Now go. And remember, we have everything we need to expose you if you don't hold up your end of the deal." Victoria stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind her. Diane let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding, her body trembling with a mixture of adrenaline and relief. Charlie walked over, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You did great, Diane. She's scared, and she should be. You have the upper hand now." Diane nodded, her eyes still fixed on the door. "I just hope Michael sees the truth before it's too late." Later that evening, Diane sat alone in her living room, the confrontation replaying in her mind. She knew Victoria would do anything to protect herself, but for the first time in a long time, Diane felt empowered. She wasn't going to let Victoria control her life anymore. The phone rang, breaking the silence. Diane picked it up, her heart skipping a beat when she saw Michael's name on the caller ID. "Michael? Mom?" Michael's voice was strained, filled with a mix of confusion and anger. "Victoria told me everything. Is it true? Did you really hire a private investigator to dig into her past?" Diane took a deep breath, steadying herself. "Yes, Michael, it's true. I did it because I love you, and I needed you to see the truth about her." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "I don't know what to think," Michael finally said, his voice heavy with emotion. "I need time to process all of this." "I understand," Diane replied softly. "But please, Michael, just look at the evidence. See her for who she really is." "I will," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I need some time." "Take all the time you need," Diane said, her heart aching for her son. "I'm here when you're ready to talk." After hanging up the phone, Diane felt a wave of exhaustion wash over her. She had taken the first step towards reclaiming her life and her son, but she knew the road ahead would be long and difficult. Still, for the first time in months, she felt a glimmer of hope. Michael paced back and forth in his living room, his thoughts a chaotic whirlwind. Victoria sat on the couch, her face a mask of feigned innocence. "I can't believe she would do this," Michael muttered, running a hand through his hair. Hiring a private investigator? What was she thinking? Victoria's eyes glistened with tears, but her voice was steady. "She's always hated me, Michael. She's never accepted our marriage. This is just another way for her to come between us." Michael stopped pacing and looked at her, a mix of anger and confusion in his eyes. "But the evidence, those documents, are they true?" Victoria's expression hardened for a moment, then softened into a look of sorrow. "Some of it, yes. But it's not what it seems. The fraud charges were dropped, and the incident with Mark. He had a drug problem. It was tragic, but I had nothing to do with it." Michael's mind raced, trying to reconcile the woman he loved with the person depicted in those documents. "Why didn't you tell me any of this before?" "I was scared," Victoria admitted, her voice trembling. "I didn't want to lose you. I thought if you knew, you'd leave me. And your mother, she's using this to drive a wedge between us." Michael clenched his fists, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. "I need to talk to her. I need to understand why she's doing this." Victoria reached out, taking his hand. "Just remember, Michael, she's trying to manipulate you. Don't let her succeed." Michael pulled his hand away, his jaw set with determination. "I need answers, Victoria. I'll be back." He drove to Diane's house, his mind a storm of conflicting emotions. When he arrived, Diane opened the door, her face lined with worry and sadness. "Michael, I'm glad you came," she said softly. "We need to talk." They sat down in the living room, the air thick with tension. Michael's gaze was intense, his anger barely contained. "Why, Mom? Why would you go behind my back and dig into Victoria's past?" Diane took a deep breath, meeting his eyes. "Because I love you, Michael. I've watched Victoria manipulate you and turn you against me. I needed you to see the truth." Michael's anger flared. "The truth? You think you're the only one who knows the truth? She's my wife, Mom. I love her. And you're trying to destroy our marriage." Diane's eyes filled with tears, her voice breaking. "I'm not trying to destroy anything. I just want you to be safe, to see who she really is. She's been lying to you, Michael." Michael stood up, his hands shaking. "You don't get to decide what's best for me. You've crossed a line, Mom. You've gone too far this time." Diane's heart broke at the sight of her son's fury. "Michael, please, just look at the evidence. She's dangerous. She's hiding things from you." "I've seen the evidence," Michael snapped, "and she explained everything. You're the one who's manipulating things, trying to control my life." Diane's voice rose, her frustration spilling over. "I'm trying to protect you." "I don't need your protection," Michael shouted, his face red with anger. "I need you to stay out of my life." The words hung in the air, a chasm opening between them. Diane felt a wave of despair wash over her, the realization hitting hard. She had lost him. Victoria had won. Michael turned away, his shoulders slumped. "I'm leaving, Mom. I don't want to see you right now." Diane watched him go, the door closing behind him with a finality that echoed through the house. She sank into the couch, tears streaming down her face. The confrontation had not gone as planned. Instead of bringing them closer, it had driven a wedge even deeper. Charlie arrived shortly after, his face grim when he saw Diane's state. What happened? Diane wiped her eyes, trying to compose herself. He's sided with her, Charlie. He thinks I'm the one manipulating him. Charlie sat down beside her, his expression thoughtful. We knew this was a possibility. Victoria is very good at what she does. But this isn't over, Diane. We have to keep fighting. Diane nodded, her resolve hardening despite her heartbreak. You're right. I need to take further action. For Michael's sake, I can't give up now. They spent the rest of the evening planning their next move, determined to expose Victoria's true nature. Her love for Michael was stronger than her despair, and she would fight with everything she had to save him from the woman who had ensnared him. The police station loomed large and intimidating as Diane and Charlie walked through the doors. The sterile environment and fluorescent lights did little to ease Diane's nerves. Her heart raced as they approached the front desk, clutching the file of evidence tightly in her hands. Charlie gave her a reassuring nod. You're doing the right thing, Diane. This is the only way to ensure Michael sees the truth. Diane nodded, taking a deep breath. I know. I just hope it's enough. They were directed to a detective's office where a stern-looking man greeted them. Detective Harris, he introduced himself, shaking their hands. What brings you in today? Charlie spoke up. We have evidence of serious crimes committed by Victoria Dawson. We believe she's been involved in financial fraud and possibly implicated in a suspicious death. Detective Harris raised an eyebrow, motioning for them to sit. Show me what you've got. Diane handed over the file, her hands trembling slightly. As the detective flipped through the pages, his expression grew more serious. This is quite a collection of allegations. You're sure about the authenticity of these documents? Charlie nodded. I've verified everything. It's all legitimate. Detective Harris leaned back in his chair, considering the information. All right. We'll need to reopen the investigation into her past. This might take some time, but we'll pursue it. Diane felt a surge of hope mixed with anxiety. Thank you, Detective. I just want my son to see who she really is. The detective gave her a sympathetic look. We'll do our best, ma'am. I'll keep you updated on our progress. As they left the station, Diane let out a shaky breath. What now? Charlie put a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Now we wait. Back at Diane's home, Maggie was waiting with a pot of tea and a comforting presence. How did it go? She asked, pouring them each a cup. Diane recounted the meeting, her emotions a whirlwind. I'm just so scared, Maggie. What if it's not enough? Maggie took her hand, squeezing it gently. It's going to be okay, Diane. You've done everything you can. Now it's up to the police. And remember, you're not alone in this. Days turned into weeks as they waited for news from Detective Harris. The uncertainty was agonizing, but Diane found solace in the support of her friends. Charlie continued to dig into Victoria's past, uncovering more details that could strengthen their case, while Maggie provided constant emotional support. One afternoon, Diane's phone rang. It was Detective Harris. We've made an arrest, he said, his voice steady. Victoria Dawson is in custody. We've found enough evidence to charge her with multiple counts of fraud and reopen the investigation into the death of Mark Thompson. Diane's heart leaped into her throat. Thank you, Detective. Thank you so much. The news spread quickly, and soon it was all over the media. Headlines screamed about the arrest of Victoria Dawson, the glamorous wife of a local businessman, implicated in a web of deceit and crime. The public scandal was immediate and intense, with reporters camped outside Michael and Victoria's home. Michael called Diane that evening, his voice a mixture of anger and confusion. "Mom, why did you go to the police? This is tearing my life apart." Diane took a deep breath, her voice calm but firm. "Michael, it's because I love you. You needed to see the truth, and this was the only way. Victoria has been lying to you from the beginning." Michael was silent for a moment, then his voice softened slightly. "I just don't know what to believe anymore. Everything is falling apart." Diane's heart ached for him. "I'm here for you, Michael. We'll get through this together. But you need to face the truth about Victoria." As the days passed, Victoria's arrest and the ensuing scandal became the talk of the town. The legal process began, with Victoria facing multiple charges. Charlie continued to assist the police with their investigation, providing more evidence and testimony. Maggie remained a constant source of strength for Diane, helping her navigate the emotional turmoil of the situation. One evening, as Diane sat in her living room with Maggie and Charlie, reflecting on the whirlwind of events, she felt a sense of empowerment. "I never imagined it would come to this," she said softly. "But I'm glad we took action, for Michael's sake." Charlie nodded. "You did what you had to do, Diane. And now, the truth is out. Michael will see who Victoria really is." Maggie smiled, her eyes filled with pride. "You're stronger than you realize, Diane. We're all here for you, every step of the way." The courtroom buzzed with anticipation, the air thick with tension. Diane sat in the front row, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The trial of Victoria Dawson had drawn intense media scrutiny, and the room was filled with reporters, curious onlookers, and a few familiar faces from the past. Diane's heart pounded as she glanced at Michael, seated a few rows behind her. His face was a mask of conflicted emotions, his eyes darting nervously around the room. She longed to reach out to him, to offer comfort, but she knew this was a journey he had to navigate on his own. The judge entered, calling the court to order. Victoria was brought in, her once confident demeanor replaced by a strained composure. She avoided eye contact with everyone, her gaze fixed on the floor. The prosecution began their opening statement, outlining the charges against Victoria. They painted a picture of a manipulative woman who had used deceit and manipulation to achieve her goals, leaving a trail of victims in her wake. The first witness was called, a former colleague from the finance firm where Victoria had worked. Victoria was charming and persuasive, the witness testified, but she was also deceitful. She embezzled funds and covered her tracks well. When it all came to light, she struck a deal to avoid jail time. Diane watched as the jury absorbed the testimony, their expressions growing more serious. She glanced back at Michael, whose face was pale and drawn. The weight of the truth was starting to sink in. Next, the prosecution called a man who had been close to Mark Thompson, Victoria's former partner. His voice trembled as he recounted the events leading up to Mark's death. Mark was clean, off drugs for months. Then suddenly, he overdosed. It didn't make sense. Victoria was the last person to see him alive. Tears welled up in Diane's eyes as she listened. The pain and loss in the man's voice were palpable, and she could see the jury's empathy growing. The prosecution's case was strong, each testimony building a damning picture of Victoria's true nature. When the defense took their turn, they tried to cast doubt on the witnesses' credibility, suggesting ulterior motives and biases. But the evidence was overwhelming. Documents, emails, and financial records were presented, each piece further solidifying the case against Victoria. As the trial resumed, the tension in the courtroom was palpable. The final witness, a forensic accountant, detailed the intricate web of financial deceit Victoria had woven. His meticulous analysis left no doubt in the jury's minds. Finally, it was time for closing arguments. The prosecution reiterated the overwhelming evidence of Victoria's guilt, emphasizing the impact of her actions on her victims. The judge gave the jury their instructions, and they retired to deliberate. The courtroom buzzed with hushed conversations as everyone waited. Diane sat in silence, her thoughts a whirlwind of emotions. She wanted justice for the people Victoria had hurt, but she also feared the impact on her family, especially Michael. The courtroom was hushed, the air thick with anticipation as the jury filed back in. Diane sat rigid in her seat, her hands clenched in her lap. Michael was beside her, his face pale and tense. The judge called the court to order, and the foreman of the jury stood to deliver the verdict. We, the jury, find the defendant, Victoria Dawson, guilty on all counts. The words hung in the air, a collective gasp rising from the spectators. Diane felt a rush of relief wash over her, tears springing to her eyes. But her relief was tempered by the devastation on Michael's face. Michael's hands trembled as he stood, his eyes wide with disbelief. "No, this can't be happening," he whispered, his voice cracking. "She can't be guilty." Diane reached out, trying to offer comfort. "Michael, I know this is hard, but He pulled away, his face contorted with anguish. "You did this. You ruined everything." Diane's heart broke at his words. "Michael, please. I was only trying to protect you." He shook his head, tears streaming down his cheeks. "You destroyed my family. How could you?" The bailiffs escorted Victoria away in handcuffs, her face a mask of fury and fear. The media outside the courthouse swarmed, cameras flashing and reporters shouting questions. Diane and Michael made their way through the chaos, their emotions raw and exposed. Back at Diane's home, the silence was deafening. Michael sat on the couch, his head in his hands. "What am I going to do? The kids, they need their mother." Diane sat beside him, her heart aching for her son and grandchildren. "We'll figure it out, Michael. We'll get through this together." He looked up at her, desperation in his eyes. "Mom, I can't do this alone. I need your help. The kids need stability, and I can't give them that right now." Diane felt a conflict raging within her. She had fought so hard to expose Victoria's crimes, but now her family was in shambles. Could she truly step in and help Michael after everything that had happened? "I don't know if I can, Michael," she said softly, her voice trembling. "I've already caused so much pain." He grasped her hands, his eyes pleading. "Please, Mom, I can't lose you too. The kids need their grandmother. I need you." Diane took a deep breath, her mind racing. She saw the pain in her son's eyes, the weight of his burden, and she knew what she had to do. "Okay, Michael, I'll help. For the kids. We'll get through this together." He pulled her into a tight embrace, sobbing into her shoulder. "Thank you, Mom. I'm so sorry for everything. I should have listened to you." She stroked his hair, tears streaming down her own cheeks. "It's going to be all right, Michael. We'll take it one day at a time." In the days that followed, Diane moved into Michael's house, helping to create a sense of normalcy for the children. She cooked meals, read bedtime stories, and offered a steady presence in their lives. Slowly, the fractured family began to heal. One evening, as Diane tucked her grandchildren into bed, Michael approached her, his face softened by gratitude. "Mom, I don't know what we would have done without you. The kids are starting to smile again. I'm starting to see hope." Diane smiled, her heart full. "We're family, Michael. We take care of each other, and we'll keep moving forward." As the weeks turned into months, the media frenzy died down, and the family found a new rhythm. Diane watched as Michael regained his strength, his love for his children, giving him the resolve to rebuild their lives. One afternoon, as they sat on the porch, watching the children play, Michael turned to Diane. "Mum, I've been thinking a lot about everything that's happened. I know it wasn't easy for you to do what you did, but I'm grateful. You saved us from something terrible." Diane took his hand, squeezing it gently. "I did what I thought was right, and now we have a chance to build something better." Michael nodded, a smile touching his lips. "We do, and with you here, I know we can." Diane looked out at the children, her heart swelling with love and hope. The road had been long and difficult, but they had found their way back to each other. Together, they would face whatever challenges lay ahead. As a family, the morning sun streamed through the kitchen window, casting a warm glow on Diane as she prepared breakfast. The smell of pancakes filled the air, a comforting aroma that seemed to anchor the house in a sense of normalcy. Her grandchildren, Lily and Sam, sat at the table, their eyes bright with anticipation. "Grandma, can we have extra syrup today?" Sam asked, a hopeful grin on his face. Diane smiled, ruffling his hair. "Of course, sweetheart. Today's a special day." As she set the plates on the table, she took a moment to savor the scene. The past few months had been a whirlwind of change, but in this moment, surrounded by her grandchildren's laughter, Diane felt a deep sense of peace. Michael entered the kitchen, his face softened by a genuine smile. "Morning, Mum," he said, placing a kiss on her cheek. "Need any help?" "I think we're all set," Diane replied, her heart swelling with pride. "Sit down and enjoy breakfast with us." They ate together, the conversation light and filled with laughter. It was a stark contrast to the tension that had once gripped their lives. After breakfast, Diane took the children to the park, their favorite place to play. As Lily and Sam ran towards the swings, Michael and Diane sat on a nearby bench. The crisp air was filled with the sounds of children's laughter and the rustling of leaves. Michael turned to Diane, his expression thoughtful. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," he began, his voice steady, "about everything that's happened. I know it's been hard, and I haven't always made it easy on you." Diane looked at him, her eyes filled with understanding. "We've all made mistakes, Michael. But what matters is that we're here now, trying to make things right." Michael nodded, his gaze fixed on the children. "I've been trying to rebuild my life, to be a better father, and I realize I couldn't have done it without you. You've been my rock through all of this." Diane reached out, taking his hand. "We're a family, Michael. We support each other, no matter what." He squeezed her hand, a grateful smile on his face. "I'm so sorry for all the hurtful things I said. I let my anger and confusion cloud my judgment. But I want to make things right between us." Diane felt tears prick her eyes, but they were tears of joy. "You already have, Michael. Just by being here, by trying. That's all I ever wanted." As they watched Lily and Sam play, Diane reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. The trials and heartache had been overwhelming, but they had emerged stronger, more united. She felt a renewed sense of purpose, a determination to provide the stability and love her grandchildren needed. Back at home, Diane spent her days creating a warm and nurturing environment for Lily and Sam. She filled the house with laughter and love, making sure they felt safe and cherished. She read them bedtime stories, baked their favorite treats, and helped them with their schoolwork. In the evenings after the children were asleep, Diane and Michael would sit together, talking about their hopes and plans for the future. They were rebuilding their lives, piece by piece, finding comfort in each other's presence. One night, as they sat on the porch, Michael turned to Diane, his expression earnest. "I've been thinking about something. I want to start volunteering, maybe help out with kids who've been through tough times. It feels like the right thing to do after everything." Diane's heart swelled with pride. "That's a wonderful idea, Michael. You have so much to offer, so much compassion to give." He nodded, a determined look in his eyes. "I want to make a difference, to help others the way you've helped me and the kids. It's time to give back." As the weeks turned into months, Diane watched with pride as Michael found his footing, becoming a dedicated volunteer and a loving father. Their relationship continued to heal, the wounds of the past slowly fading. One afternoon, Diane received a letter from the court, informing her that Victoria's appeal had been denied. The sense of finality brought a wave of relief. Justice had been served, and now they could truly move forward. That evening, as they gathered around the dinner table, Diane looked at her family, her heart overflowing with gratitude. "We've come a long way," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "I'm so proud of all of us." Lily and Sam beamed at her, their faces alight with happiness. Michael raised his glass, a smile on his face. "To new beginnings," he said, his voice strong and hopeful, "and to the love and strength that got us here." Diane raised her glass, feeling a profound sense of peace. "To family," she echoed, "and to the future." The morning sun bathed Diane's living room in a warm, golden light as she sat at the kitchen table, sipping her coffee. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee mixed with the scent of pancakes sizzling on the stove. Lily and Sam were giggling in the next room, their laughter a melody that filled the house with joy. Michael entered the kitchen, a smile spreading across his face as he took in the scene. "Good morning, Mom," he said, giving her a hug. "The kids seem happy today." Diane returned his smile, her eyes shining with contentment. "They're adjusting well. It's a blessing to see them so carefree." Michael nodded, pouring himself a cup of coffee. "I've been thinking about everything we've been through, and I'm so grateful for how you've held us together. You've been amazing." Diane blushed slightly, waving off his praise. "We've all done our part. We're a team, remember?" As they sat down to breakfast, the children joined them, their faces alight with excitement. "Grandma, can we go to the park today?" Sam asked, his eyes wide with anticipation. Diane chuckled, ruffling his hair. "Of course we can. It's a beautiful day. Let's make the most of it." The park was a haven of green, the trees swaying gently in the breeze. Lily and Sam ran ahead to the playground, their laughter echoing through the air. Diane and Michael followed, taking a leisurely stroll along the path. "I've been volunteering at the community center," Michael said, breaking the comfortable silence. "Working with kids who've had tough times. It's been incredibly rewarding." Diane smiled, her heart swelling with pride. "I'm so proud of you, Michael. You're making a real difference in their lives." He nodded, his gaze thoughtful. "It's helped me too, more than I can say. It's given me a sense of purpose, a way to give back." They reached a bench and sat down, watching the children play. Diane turned to Michael, her expression serious but gentle. "You've come a long way, Michael. We all have. And I want you to know, no matter what happens, I'll always be here for you." Michael's eyes softened, and he reached out to take her hand. "Thank you, Mom. I wouldn't have made it through without you. We're stronger together." The afternoon passed in a blur of laughter and sunshine. Diane watched her grandchildren with a content heart, feeling the weight of past troubles lifting. They were building new memories, laying the foundation for a brighter future. Back at home, Diane helped the children with their homework while Michael prepared dinner. The kitchen was filled with the comforting sounds of sizzling vegetables and bubbling sauce, the air thick with the scent of garlic and herbs. "Dinner's ready," Michael called, setting the table with care. Diane and the children joined him, the family gathering around with eager appetites. As they ate, the conversation flowed easily, filled with stories from school and plans for the weekend. Diane felt a profound sense of peace, knowing they had come through the storm stronger and more united. After dinner, as the children settled in for the night, Michael and Diane sat on the porch, the stars twinkling above them. The night was cool and serene, the perfect end to a perfect day. "I've been thinking about the future," Michael said, his voice steady. "I want to build a better life for the kids, for all of us. Maybe even go back to school, get a degree in counseling. I want to help others find their way, like you helped me." Diane's eyes filled with tears of pride. "That's a wonderful idea, Michael. You have so much to offer, and I know you'll make a great counselor." He smiled, his eyes reflecting the hope and determination in his heart. "Thanks, Mom. And thank you for believing in me, even when I didn't believe in myself." Diane reached out and hugged him tightly. "We're a team, remember? We've got this." As they sat together, the stars above them a silent witness to their bond, Diane felt a sense of fulfillment. They had faced their trials, overcome their challenges, and now they were ready to embrace the future with open hearts.